Hello. Hello, good morning. How are things? Oh, I forgot something. Yeah. Good after morning. Well, I think what I want to do today to start is make some of these error messages a little better that we were seeing, because it's not going to be as easy as you would think to do that. And that'll be interesting. And maybe annoying and difficult. I don't know. So, all right. So this program compiles and runs. That's fine. We can help, and let's delete some of our other mains. I just want to be able to go to main. All right. All right. We've got one main. So if we add a new overload of do thing that is not handled by any of the ones that we've defined, we will get an error saying, hey, none of these overloads is actually what you want. Now the problem is that that message is going to be pretty terrible. So we'll do like vector 4, and we'll say q vector 4, I don't know, v4. Do thing of v4. That is going to be bad for us, right? So it's like, hey, so there are several things wrong with this error message. First of all, why the hell is the parenthesis red? Okay, let's talk about that. And then we're just printing the usings that imported these things instead of the actual declarations. And then, we're sort of printing this twice, which is goofy. But if we fix that, we have to fix it. Maybe we just take it off of this part. I don't know. We have to see if removing one or the other of these would affect another error message, because there might be a message that only prints one or the other of these. We'll see. Have I learned to make a programming language? I don't know. Will any of us ever learn to make a programming language? Who among us knows how to make a programming language? All right, so the first step, reporting this using by itself is not that useful. It is good if we report both that and the site. Now the problem that we have is that when we say these are the possible overloads and we print all these locations, I think are just coming off the procedure declaration. And I assume, we'll go look at this in a second, but I assume that's what's happening is we're reporting this because when using imports declarations, it copies its own location onto those. That's not what we want, I don't think. But then once we fix that, okay, then we'll get the declarations, but then it won't be obvious how they got into the namespace. So then the question is there then a reasonable way for us also to print the using? I'm not sure, because we might be eliminating the information. Like we might want to wait on that until a later pass over the compiler. But we want to at least, it's better, okay, it'll be best to print both the actual procedure and the using. Second best will be to print the actual procedure. Third best is just to print the using. That's not that helpful, and it doesn't tell you what we're talking about. Absolute worst would be to print nothing at all. Actually, the absolute worst would be to be JavaScript, but next to worst to that would be to not print useful information here at all. Okay, so that's the short-term game plan. Others may have suggested this, but I would recommend that you display the carets even in color error mode just to make things super clear. Maybe. Yeah, that's easy to toggle. No, I've made probably about 11 programming languages. But most of them were small, like school projects that, not really school projects, projects I was doing instead of schoolwork that I didn't necessarily take very far. This is by far the one that I've put the most work into, by like an order of magnitude at least. So it's a different situation. Yeah, most of these programming languages I did back in the 90s when I was in college, so yeah. All right, so we're gonna make this error message better. So let me look at what location, remember this phase 3 routine that we've been looking at for a while? This calls make using import declaration. I'm actually surprised at this. So it copies the location info from the target declaration. So according to this, we should be reporting the declaration, unless this gets overwritten later, which could well happen. Or if it doesn't, so we have two, it's always confusing, but we have two declarations we're making here. Essentially, we're making the file scope version here. That seems to get the right location. But then we're making the export to application scope declaration here. You know, instead of always making both, we should maybe just do one or the other. Like just change what scope we're putting it in. I'm going to write down rethink file scope. Because making both is not necessary, I don't think. All right. Make using import declaration. So if this puts the location of the using, which it probably does. Is importer the using? Possibly. Let's just see. So this does copy the location info. Oh boy. For used before declared to work, location has to come from the using, not from the source. Yes, that is true. Okay. Now we have a real problem. Except it's actually not a problem here. So this exporting only happens into data scopes, and there's no such thing as used before declared in the data scope. Okay. So let's go back. We're going to have to test this. Okay. Now I need a list of like what we're doing today. So we want decal error message, and we want used before declared. That's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing. Then we're going to see if that fixes our error message. Other imported, outer imported. Can't even read. How am I going to program when I can't even read? God, this takes so long to compile. All right. Oh, that's the debug builds. We just compiled the release build. Okay. We actually got the procedure. So that was the problem. Now we actually see the correct overloads. So that's better. We're one step further from JavaScript on the badness scale. Why not have two scopes in general, a library package scope and a file scope where exported entities are added to the package scope? You can even add flags to the entities, so when it is imported and used, you error telling the entity is not exported. Yeah, dude. Yeah. All right. He's talking about things I haven't worked on yet and saying, why not blah, blah, blah. The reason is because I'm writing an entire programming language and I don't do everything at once. That's the reason. Okay. So the question is, did I break a used before declared situation in applications in imperative scope? So we're going to do this. We're going to say using something, and something is going to be declared after this procedure, and I'm going to say x how does that go? Oh, well, we got to get rid of our overload. That doesn't work. Okay, we didn't get a used before declared error there. We did get one there. Well, I don't know what I'm talking about in that comment. Maybe it just works a different way since I made that comment. I did change that logic a little bit. All right, so I'm going to go to that, and I'm going to say we'll just take that out and see what happens. Unable to open examples language te. That's bad. We have a bug somewhere, okay. We had a stray 0 stomped down in the middle of it, or no, not a stray 0. If that wasn't a C string, which probably wasn't, it's like the length ended up wrong. That was a spurious error in our test framework. Well, I don't know, people. So what did we just do? Report the location of using procedure, not the using in error messages. Okay. Terry Davis death hoax. Did he pretend to be dead? What's going on? All right. Okay. So I did test the use before declared situation. It seems okay. So next we can improve this a little more. Oh, let's go back to having an error. Intentional error. So next, this wanted float given vector 4 situation. So I suspect that printing out this argument 1 is a thing that we're like pasting on top. We could set that as state. Because what happens is, okay, so you have a procedure that checks, or you know, you have somewhere in your code, it's checking that your procedure call is correct, that all the types match, right? And how do you do that? Well, you iterate over all the arguments and you check that those arguments match individually. And to do that, you call some general type checking routine that checks one expression against another expression. So that general type checking routine doesn't know that you're checking a procedure argument, right? So it's just printing out like, hey, type mismatch, man. Here we're saying, oh, it's in this particular argument. We could modify this to like, you know, we could set a variable or some state before we go down into this and say, hey, type mismatch, blah, blah, blah. But the problem there is, well, you don't want to have to augment every error message individually, right? So then it becomes a systemic thing where you say, oh, this is in the following error happened in argument 1, colon, blah, or, you know, afterward like we have it now. And then if that's all you're going to do, then why pollute the lower level system with that? Why not just do it at the calling site? So let's look at who has argument %d. There. So what I assume happened is that type mismatch didn't used to say the wanted and given types. And so we put them here, but it's not necessary now. So let's try that. So all this string wanted, string given that we're computing is just for this. If we're listing overloads, right. So we do set this global that like, hey, we're saying what the errors were for overloads. So like, I think we don't want the string wanted and string given. Now, if we're not listing overloads, I bet this is all redundant. I bet we just take this out. Maybe. Well, so the problem is, all right, let's just verify that this works, which it will. The problem that we have is that maybe, so the general routine that reports this is called check that types match. And I suspect that maybe for all maybe it doesn't say both of these for all errors. That might be why we're reporting it here. And maybe it should. Like, let's see if we can generate an error that doesn't give us that information. Like, okay, so we got a routine. We could say F, hello. That is not an overload. Whoops. Now we're got name problems. All right. Okay, so that's just type mismatch, checking argument 1 of call to proc. So that is still redundantly annoying, right? But it's not as bad because it's separated out more in space. Okay. This should give us a different error. Too many arguments, that's fine. For too many arguments, we've got a red parenthesis. And by the way, we had that also for the overload problem, right? So we're going to figure that out today. Are format strings any better for localization? You still have the order issue. No, you don't, because the order is in the format string. Okay. Too many arguments. What other? Well, okay, so we can of course have like X is a procedure that takes int mapped to int, right? And go proc like that. Whoops. That works, duh, because we passed it the right thing. What if we go there into string, type mismatch, wanted int given string. This doesn't give us enough information, right? Because it's not saying that it's the return value that mismatches. We're just saying when passing a procedure. So that kind of sucks. That's probably easy to deal with. But that we still got the int string part. Let's just do this the other way around. Let's go to, we're going to check that types match, the main overload of it, which is a long routine that checks a lot of things. And we can just look for report error. Attempt to match to autocasts. Okay, that doesn't need this. Attempt to autocast. Call, okay, that's fine. Internal compiler errors we don't care about for the purposes of this. Cannot pass an incomplete special. Yeah, that's weird. Type mismatch, blah. Okay. So there we use this wanted and given string. That's good. Mismatching relative pointer types. Okay. I think we just always want this. We always want to give wanted and given string. What are the arguments to this? The wanted, the given, and the prefix. So well, we just say wanted, given here. Okay. That's fine. There we use the types. I don't know why I did a switchable expression. Oh, wait. Wanted and given string returns an allocated thing. I have to free it. All right. So SOA is deprecated, so we won't ever get this error message right now, but if we undeprecate it, let's just do this. I don't think we will undeprecate it. This is not a very good error message, but this is going to have multi-parentheses stacked. Do the same thing here. Just okay. Incompatible specializations of %s. That's fine for now. Oh, here we go. We go into crazy wanted and given string. Like if you pass two structs that have the same name but come from different files, we like super disambiguate here. Those all seem fine. Foreign versus non-foreign procedures. Attempt to pass non-dynamic array as dynamic. We should just maybe say array mismatch or something, but like anytime you're trying to be kind of Englishy about what's happening, you should also just give them the information in case they don't understand what the hell you're trying to say, which sometimes I don't even understand what I was trying to say. Right? So we'll say, hey, on the one hand, for all of these, you could just condense these down and just say type mismatch, blah. But we're sort of trying to say why they mismatch. But you don't want to devolve into also not giving them the specific information that you would have in a general type mismatch error. Oops. So we're just basically doing this to everything in here, man. Everything that needs it. Okay. Internal compiler errors don't count. They're not supposed to be user-facing. We'll do it here too. Look at all the mistakes you can make when you're programming. Isn't that great? How many mistakes you can make? That's not even all of them. That is a small fraction of all the mistakes you can make. Mistake number 1 is programming in JavaScript. Okay. All right. So we say, okay, this is when we're passing a procedure. But we should say, I'm not sure why we're reporting this location. So we need to say, hey, it's the return value. Okay, if these are lambdas, we do all this checking. This stuff we were looking at is, the easy stuff to check about lambdas. And then we look at the return values. Okay, if one of the return values didn't match, then if we're not silent check, we say interp report info and actually let's make the site be this should highlight the actual return value instead. And then we're also going to say what it was. Report info or report no label. Let's just give this a short name. I don't know if I pass that. Yeah, we do. When checking return value %d, comma, I plus 1, but if there's only one return value, let's just say the return value, because that's a very common case when checking the return value. All right? There we go. Type mismatch. We wanted an int. We were given a string. That string, when checking the return value. Isn't that a better error message than what we got before? Isn't this better than this? Yes, it is, because it actually tells you what's wrong. Typo A array instead of array. Let me see. A array. Oh, yeah. Right, I was trying to correct his capitalization, and I messed up. Okay, so that's good. We've done our good Samaritan work for today. Are there plans for internationalization of the compiler? Yes. it'll be very easy to internationalize all the error messages and stuff. The harder part the harder part is if you want to do something about the frickin' programming language and the fact that all the keywords and directives are in English. I sort of have vague ideas about doing that, but of course then you have to compile any program from any language, so you need to have a thing that says, yeah, I don't know, we'll see. Question mark, what if mismatch in check int string? Okay, first of all, I can't read that Haskell syntax to this day. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what check int arrow string frickin' means. So you got to be more specific. Function that returns function that takes int and returns string. Will it print the right message? Well, we could check that. So you're basically saying if instead of an argument, it's a return value, right? So let's just say that return I don't know. So like that. Well, and then this is okay. Type mismatch wanted int given string. When checking the, it's not highlighted for some reason. This is interesting, but when checking the return value and checking type of return value 1. So it says when checking the return value on line 22 and checking the type of return value 1 on line 26. I don't know why it says return value 1. And this is not very helpful just to say function. But we do sort of give the information. How many people are working on this? Like 3 or 4. The compiler has been cross-platform since 2014. Do return value indices begin at 0? They begin with 1. Does it have closures? Not right now. They probably will, but it's just not that high of a priority. Okay, so we probably could make this a little bit nicer. So like we could debug, why doesn't this highlight? Why is it falling back to just the caret? But I actually want to hit the more common error messages first. So the more common error message that still has problems is like, why is that red right there? I don't frickin' know. Okay. And we're going to go too many puppies with guns in their hands. Too many puppies. Too many arguments. So the site is what? It's whatever was passed this site to this, which is call. So basically, a procedure call? Well, hold on. Let's make sure it's not. I doubt it's proc expression. So is site argument 5? One, two, three, four, 5. Yes, it is. Okay. So procedure call basically has that paren. So here's where we create a procedure call. It's the only place, as far as I know. So where do we set the rightmost bound on the thinger? Is it down here? Well, let's see. So we're parsing a procedure call. I don't know which one it is. It's probably one of the first ones in one of the first files. So we've got a thing. It's L0 is set. C0, this is the line and character where it starts. Line and character when it ends are not set. Now they are. Wait, expect and eat. Oh, if we pass this in, expect and eat probably sets it. Yeah. Well, we can just say that for procedure call, all right. So no more red parenthesis there. See, it's a little bit arbitrary because the procedure call just says the arguments and not the whole thing. And then the procedure expression just says this part, and nobody really cares about the parentheses now. I don't know. So also in that overload, we were getting red parenthesis problems, but that's probably fixed as well. Wait, no, it wasn't in that one. It was... Oh, I guess it was in this one. So this looks better. Let's make sure Sokoban still builds. Oh, wait, we got to build the release compiler, not the debug compiler. Great. Great. And run tests. Okay. Error message improvements. That was good. That was good. Okay. I have on my piece of paper Rethink file scope. It actually, so, you know, like I was saying before, well, I'll recap. When you load a file, it has two scopes, right? There's like a private scope for the file, and then a public scope that's like your application scope. And right now, when we load a file, everything goes into the file scope. And then we export things into the application scope if necessary. There's a little bit of benefit to that with regard to, oh, maybe there's no benefit with regard to overloads. Yeah, I don't know. So when you're looking for overloads, what it does mean is that we find redundant overloads and have to, you know, uniqueify them because you can find a link to a procedure more than once. Actually, you know, that could happen anyway if the user did some usings, but it happens all the time when things are exported. And so I'm thinking maybe I want to say, look, you go into one scope or the other scope, but not both. Oh, no, right. Okay, so the problem with that is that exported stuff in a file needs to be able to see the non-exported stuff in a file. And right now there's only one notion of your parent scope. It's the parent of the scope that you live in, right? So you can't like live in an outer scope and also see the inner scope. That's just not how it works. I could imagine making it that way, but that is a large enough change that I don't want to do it right now. But you definitely could have a thing that says, look, I can have a different parent scope than the scope that would be the default of where I live, right? So that I go and look at some other things. But yeah, since it's not an easy thing, the reason I was thinking about that was like, oh, maybe it'll be an easy thing. It's not. That would be a major change. And so we're not going to entertain that because we want to get features done so that people can use this thing in beta, and we will work toward that. Are there any questions about what's going on? Are there many features missing? Yes, as I say, there's two main features. Library functionality improvements, which is what I'm starting to work on right now, and the macro system, which will be the next thing after library improvements. Okay, I'm going to make some tea. While I am making tea, whoops, questions? Address them to me so that sometimes a lot of chat goes by and it's harder for me to see things. There are fewer messages in the Elite Luxury Frequent Flyer Specialness Lounge, and so it may be easier for me to see them there. What do I do when I'm not programming? Other things than programming. A while ago, I mentioned a lot of work went into not needing header files. You don't really understand that. I mean, actually, we wrestled with this a lot last night on the late night stream. It just takes a tremendous amount of work. Over half the work of the compiler so far easily has been in just dealing with the fact that we don't have header files. It takes a large amount of engineering work because if you don't have header files, And you don't have any kind of real order of declaration dependency or requirement. What does that mean? Well, if you have some expression that wants to look up identifiers, if it looks them up and they don't exist, they might show up later because some other thing might compile. Or if it looks them up and they exist, but maybe you don't know the type of them yet, right? So that doesn't sound that complicated when I just say that one thing, but multiplied by all the stuff that has to happen, it's really annoying. But first of all, I'm always trying to find ways to make it less annoying. And second of all, it's really worth it because the amount of programmer annoyance that you save is tremendous, assuming anybody uses this language. And so it's worth putting all that work in initially. SOA is not one of the big missing features. SOA is more of a minor feature to begin with even. But it'll be implementable, hopefully, in terms of these other things. And if it isn't, then we'll just put it back the way it was. Have I heard about Fuzzlin? It's a random program generator for the Roslyn compiler. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people make fuzzers all the time. We sort of have one in progress. That's a common thing that people do in recent years. Do I think we need macros? I don't think we need C-style macros, but Lisp-style macros would be pretty good. And so we're doing that, probably. Did I ever fiddle with Forth or other stack-based languages? Yes. Nobody's asking questions in the Elite Lounge. It's a different side conversation happening. Oh, someone just subscribed, so let me refresh the Elite Lounge. We now have 60 people with passes to get into the Elite Lounge. All right. Have I decided how I want to manage, including libraries, importing packages? Yes, and that is what I am generally working on right now. We're working on things that will build up there. Yeah. If the order of files is arbitrary, does it make compilation slower? I don't know. You tell me. Let's compile an 80,000 line program. I don't know. Is that slower than compiling an 80,000 line program in C++, or is it faster? So it's a good question, though. So in one sense, yes, it is slower because you have to do CPU work to figure out these dependencies. Like that freedom isn't free, man. You gotta, that has to be computed somehow. But on the other hand, you're not doing this massively redundant thing that happens in C or C++, where you're just compiling the same headers over and over and over and over again, right? So, yes, it does cost something, but the thing that you're replacing is tremendously expensive. Oh, you posted a language question in the Discord. I didn't see it. Oh, I missed it. How does this following thing get parsed? I don't understand the question. Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the rare cases that would screw up nested comments. And you just live with that. It almost never happens. It's fine. It's not a real problem, I don't think. But yes, it's a little bit of a singularity in the nested comment handling. Can I explain what I mean by Lisp style macros? I'll explain it later when we actually do it. If I spend too much time explaining things that we're later going to do, we'll never get to do them. You think renaming using to take reads more naturally and makes more sense in terms of the meaning of the words? Well, no, because you're not taking anything away from anyone else. And also, the word take never gets used in any other programming languages that I know of. I've never seen that, so nobody's going to know what it means. I agree that using is a weird word, but, I mean, come on. Have I given any thought about syntax? No! No syntax discussions. If you come to San Francisco, can you come see the company? I don't know. We don't really do that, man. We don't do company tours. It's not how it works for us. Do I enjoy math and or physics? Sometimes, yes. When will this be done? When it's done. What's the status of the compiler's linker? Well, the compiler doesn't own a linker. That's the system linker that I was talking about, and that is not something we have control over. So when I say removing or replacing it, I mean replacing it by something that we write, but we don't have a linker right now. We still use the system linker. I don't know any Dzogchen or Dogchen or however you pronounce that, so I can't give a recommendation. By the way, how you should spell using is a syntax discussion, and I don't think that that's worth very much. It's not worth your mental effort. Don't bike shed on that. It's not remotely an important issue. Will a sockets library form part of the release libraries? Will linking be required to access the WinSockets API? I don't know what you mean by that last question. We can't make a sockets library because sockets are an operating system interface. We could make a library for networking operations that's higher level than that, but we can't really implement sockets. That's just not how it works. Does the compile time execution have any sort of runtime or memory cap to it? Well, if you use more memory than your computer can use, you'll have a problem. Will the game support online multiplayer? No, this is a single player game that we are making. Why divide the audience into elite fans and regular fans? Why not? Oh, I missed the question. Do I have a rough estimate of how much engineering effort writing a better linker would take? No. I have no estimate of that. But I don't think, well, writing a better linker is a different problem. Like, I don't think we would try to make a linker, because the reason linkers are an insane amount of code is because they're crazy in terms of what they do. Bad decisions were made. So most of the time when it comes to, 1970s software, I say that they had much better ideas about how to do things than we have today. But linkers are sort of the exception to that. Linkers are way too complicated, and they did it, as far as I know, to accommodate languages like Lisp and stuff where the accommodation should have gone the other way around, where like the languages like Lisp and stuff should have done more effort to integrate with a common low-level system that was simpler. So we ended up with this just things that shouldn't be as complicated as they are. And that makes the whole problem harder and more annoying. I don't think that we would attempt to do most of the potential functionality of what like link.exe or LLD can do. But I don't think that that's a smart thing. So the question is, if we just want to statically link some libraries, can we say what some basic constraints are that make the job much simpler? I assume that's true. We haven't looked at it. But then also, if we don't want to statically link, can we just write exe directly that has stubs that say, for example, on Windows, just load these DLLs and resolve these symbols in those DLLs to this name? I assume that's also not very hard. So we'll probably do one or the other of those. But since we switched to the DLLC library instead of the statically linked, at least for debug builds, it doesn't take up as high of a proportion of our compile time, and so it's correspondingly lower priority, right? So with static linking, it was like a third of our compile time. Now it's 15%. So it's less of an emergency. But yeah, it is something. As the compiler gets faster, that 15% will go up, and it'll eventually become an issue. How much work do I think the optimizer will need? Infinite. Optimizers require infinite amounts of work. People are complaining about the Elite Lounge. People will complain about anything. We should rename it the All-Inclusive Diversity Lounge. Okay, let's do some more work. what is the reason for linking with the C runtime? Because you will always need to link with the C runtime if you are linking against C libraries, which some people will want to do. But then right now, even not in that case, we have some dependencies on the C libraries. For example, math functions that we haven't implemented ourselves yet. That's more of a temporary situation. How big of a quality of life improvement has it been? Massive. It's been huge because I'm actually happy when I program now. Okay. I'm trying to sync the elite land. There we go. 61. We now officially have 100 subscribers, according to Twitch. We're in 3-digit subscriber range. That's like some serious situation there. Now the Illuminati will send me an email and say, oh, you're so famous. We'll tell you the Illuminati secrets. If you could go back 20 years ago, would you develop the compiler, or do you know more and would have made mistakes? I certainly know a lot more about what to do now than I knew 20 years ago, if that's the question. Do you mean if I could have my knowledge from today and go back in time? And yeah, I mean, I could kick some total ass in 1998 if I time traveled. I don't know. I mean, step 1, make a battle royale game. What kind of tea? Bengal spice right now. Do you have enough knowledge to build a computer from scratch? Yeah, I mean, I could probably figure out, like I know enough to fill in the gaps of what I don't know. It wouldn't be a super good computer probably because, you know, but like back when we had Radio Shack, and you could just go down and buy some parts down at the local mall and like solder them onto a board, I definitely could make a computer out of that. It would be super annoying and difficult and pain in the ass, and probably individual parts would fail a lot, but yes. But that said, you know, it wouldn't necessarily be a good computer because hardware is not really a thing that I ever focused on learning about. How about a soft CPU on an FPGA? That would be a lot easier. Any thoughts on the new NVIDIA cards ray tracing stuff? Yeah, I think there are new NVIDIA cards that have ray tracing. What do we recommend as a C game libraries? I don't want to do manga stuff like audio graphics. I don't know how that's manga stuff, but I don't know. SDL is still the thing, right? what is my opinion on million core processor RISC? I think if somebody built a RISC computer with 1 million cores, that would be a thing. All right, let's actually do some work. Yeah, these questions are getting way into the weeds. Wait, let me check the Elite Lounge. Okay. Nothing new on the Elite Lounge. All right. So I think I want to add the ability to make namespaces. And you want to be able to do stuff. So in the same way that we do things like, you know, we say scope file or whatever here. We want to be able to do stuff like, I don't know, say you have a namespace, that's the name of it, right? I don't know, say you did that. You could say enter namespace, and then everything else is in there. Like you wouldn't do this, right? There's a question of what do you call the parent namespace? Probably call it ... or something, but maybe parent. I don't know. But, you know, basically to do this in such a way that you don't have to do this thing in C++ and then everything is frickin' indented, that sucks. Of course, that's how static ifs are here, but maybe that makes more sense. Now, the thing is, what does having namespaces actually buy you? How does it make your programming easier? It actually buys me the ability to organize things. Yeah. What should happen when you want to use multiple namespaces? Just don't do that. Well, if you mean by putting a declaration into another namespace, then I think you would probably be able to do something like this, like poke into namespace. I don't know. So this would be saying, hey, make an entry in this namespace that's the same as my vector3 here. And one way that we would use this, so one use case that we have is like, say you import this print module and you want to give it a bunch of routines for how to print different data types. And you want to let overloading resolve which of those gets used, and you don't want to pay a runtime cost for it. Well, it could look in the print routines namespace for stuff, and then you could poke new overloads of a print routine into that namespace, right? And that way you can have this organized way of things, you know, telling it how to print stuff, without that interfering with the global namespace, for example. If you get what I'm saying. This is all very speculative so far. You don't need namespaces like that. What you want are import names, e.g. when you import, it creates an entity that refers to a namespace. Yes, Ginger Bill, I fucking know that. I already am going to have that. This is separately from that. Dude. All right. The fact is that you want to be able to make more namespaces than just the number of libraries that you import, right? You could have a hack. So if you only let people do something like this, that could be a hack for how to make a namespace, but that's not very, you will end up with people doing things like loading empty files and whatnot. So I don't think that that is the right thing to do. That said, I don't strictly know that this is the model that I'm doing. Like, I'm just sort of typing stuff right now, and we'll figure out if this is the right way to do it. But yeah, I've thought enough about this to know that I want that. I mean, dude, you keep sending me these messages that are like, just do this thing because it's obviously the right thing. And like, well, I maybe don't agree that that's obviously the right thing, but also, like, I just haven't done it yet. Like, how much do you want me to have preemptively done before you send me messages about things? Like, it gets old. Like, we're working on the namespacing now. So if we haven't done a particular namespace feature yet, it's because we're working on the namespacing now. What if you poke something that was already poked? Well, it would be the same as when you add code to a namespace. So if it's a procedure overload, that's legal and it adds another overload, unless it's redundant. And if it's not a procedure, then that's illegal and you get an error. This is just a way of, so, you know, what Ginger Bill's talking about, like if I import a library, say my print is import print, right? So there we import this thing and we assign it into this namespace. That's all fine. That gives you some level of control. But I want to be able to put things in there, right, is sort of what we're saying. So in this case, this would be, you know, my print, and we might have print vector 3, or just print, and in my end, it might be called print vector 3, and print vector 4, and print quaternion. I have no idea if this is a good syntax for this. Probably not. Probably put semicolons, because we put semicolons after everything. Yeah, maybe it's just, maybe Ginger Bill, the thing is just in text messages, stuff comes across in certain ways, maybe. I don't know, man. What you actually want to do is finish the compiler and release it. That is true. So the things that we're working on are on the pathway. So we need good library support prior to release, just because, well, people are going to want to start wanting libraries. They're going to want to start making their own. And if the organization for that is not good, then it won't be good. So here's the thing, though. This is like one way to do it. there's a whole other set of concerns that means that maybe this isn't a good way to do it. So like a struct is basically a namespace in principle. And in fact, a struct with all constant members doesn't have any storage, and it just is a namespace, right? So if you have this to declare a namespace, it's sort of redundant with a struct with all constant members. So a different way to do it is you could say, like, instead of this, you could say namespace is a namespace or something, and that just means the same thing as a struct, except everything has to be constant, right? This kind of a thing. This is annoying because, well, if I start putting stuff in here, then it's in between the brackets. But then maybe you still have all this, right? So then it's just a question of how you declare a namespace. And is this better or is that better? There's a second question of, oh, you know, it's not true. It's not true. What do I mean that they contain, it's a struct with all constant things? That's not true. It's a struct where anything that's not constant is not instantiable. Let's do that, you know. It's not instantiable multiple times because it has storage in the global storage. That's sort of the difference between a struct and a namespace. That said, the idea of that is a very tweaky code micro-optimizing thing. So one decision that you could make as a language designer is say, we're potentially going to pay a tiny bit of performance on accessing global variables, and just say there's no difference between a struct and a namespace, and a struct is a namespace, and any struct is reinstantiable. Like if I do this, then I could just instantiate, I could say A is a my print, and B is a my print, and C is a my print. We could do that. You can't do that in C++ because, well, for many reasons, but even imagining you had this kind of namespace naming facility, you can't, like, if the code is generated to expect that things are global and have one address, then you can't really instantiate multiple versions of that because the code only knows how to talk about one version of the data, if you know what I'm saying. But doing this would then mean that all routines in this file that access these globals would essentially be taking this pointer as their implicit first parameter. And we already have an implicit first parameter that's the context pointer. Maybe the context pointer could sort of have like a module base offset pointer in it, but then that has to get set every time you call it. It's like just complicated enough that I kind of don't want to do or think about it right now. But it might be the right thing in the long term because it might simplify things for users. I don't know. There's a lot of issues. Poking thing looks like good old advice, but very limited. I don't know what advice does. Catching up on chat right now. Yeah, so I was thinking about Handmade Compiler, and I was very enthusiastic about it, but then I was like, I just have too much to do in the foreseeable future. So I want to do it, but if I do it, it'll be a long time from now. So I wouldn't encourage other people not to do it if they want to do it. Like, that's fine. Strange thing about using structured namespaces, namespaces aren't instantiable. Then comes the question of what should be grabbed within the closure of the namespace. Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Namespaces seems to make things more complicated to me. If you want to have multiple libraries with functions of the same name, renaming is clean. Just your opinion. Well, like, what if your library wants to present multiple namespaces to you? How does it do that? You know what I'm saying? Do we have any composition styled polymorphism stuff like interfaces, traits, concepts, mixins, type classes, and whatever other? Yes. Not directly implemented as a first class thing, but you can implement it yourself. So, Isn't pairs series bitwise basically handmade compiler? Maybe. I haven't seen it. Haven't seen it. Split into two libraries. What if the library wants to present 10 namespaces to you? Because that is what is most wanted. Okay. So I kind of don't know what to do here. If I were to do this, my feeling is I shouldn't do this, or this, the instantiable namespace right now, because it's potentially too big of a diversion from just getting these features done. And the sooner we get these features done, the sooner we can get people on the beta. On the other hand, having structs and namespaces be a different thing in your language makes that language more complicated, right? And we're potentially just adding more complication right now, which is really something I don't want to do. Like, I feel like the language is close to max complexity of what I want it to be. So anytime I add complication, I need to find ways to remove complication as well. On the third hand, the whole implicit this pointer, module offset, whatever that you would need in order to make namespaces instantiable is itself complication. And so it's actually not clear to me that it would actually be simpler in the end. It's just an idea that it might be. Do we have support for weak, strong conditional compilation where untrue cases can be either error checked or not at compile time? So the deal is we have a static if, right? Which is how we compile things out instead of if-def. Stuff in static if has to parse correctly, but it doesn't have to type check correctly. So, you know, if you have a procedure call inside a static if, it has to parse as a procedure call, but the procedure doesn't have to exist, for example, obviously. Otherwise, it wouldn't be very useful. Why does Emacs create these files? Yeah, you can stop that. You just have to tweak your .emacs. What if files and folders were implicit structs? I mean, I thought about that, but it probably makes it... Well, first of all, they already sort of are because we have a file scope, right? But outside of file scope, they are not. And the reason is just, I think you want to be free to factor your program around without breaking things, you know? You kind of want it to be orthogonal, how you name things and what file they're in, kind of. Which is one reason why I kind of disagree with the Ginger Bill assertion that all you need is to assign your import library to a name. I think you want that, but I don't think it's true that that solves everything. I mean, that's, you know, that's one of the reasons I got annoyed at that statement is it's very easy. So there's a thing that happens when you're designing programming languages is, okay, it's hard to make a language good, right? And so when you're trying to make a language good, you are influenced by certain aesthetic drives or directions. Like we want it to be as simple as possible, right? Is one of them. You know, while doing what it has to do. So one of the biases that can come up is if you're just designing the language and you're not writing enough big software in it, it's very easy to say, oh, all you need is this simple thing. And if you need more than that, you're doing it wrong or something, right? And it's easy to say all you need is this simple thing because you see the beauty of the simple thing and you don't see the use cases for which that's not good and how bad it would be to not have other things for those use cases because you're not doing that part of the work. So you don't see those things. And this happens in, you know, I'm not speaking about any particular case now. This happens in a lot of language design of a lot of languages, right? It's sort of the natural path of what happens when you build a compiler. So that's one of the reasons why we're building the Sokoban game at the same time, and it's a big game, is to be constantly reminding ourselves of what we actually need versus, you know, in order to help prevent falling into an idealist language maker framework of like, I'm going to tell you what you need because I see what is simple and beautiful, right? Simple and beautiful is good. Like that is undisputed. You want your language to be that, but you also don't want it to be that to the exclusion of things that people need. So Bill says he's not trying to assert, but asks, why do I want multiple namespaces? You have completely different opinions and tastes, so we have different results. Yeah, totally. It did come out a little bit like an assertion because you were saying all you need and handles the situation perfectly and blah, blah, blah. So came out a lot like an assertion. But I mean, the print example is one such example. So let me back up a second. So right now, because we haven't done the library work that I'm starting on now, until today, you know, if you import a library, it sort of shares your application's global scope with you, right? And that's how you talk to the library, because you can't, you know, as of today, you still can't even do this, right? So as of today, what happens is you import print and you get whatever names print gives you, and then, you know, you could have a renamer here or something like we demoed that one time, but these are not very common, right? So usually you just do this and you get whatever names you get. And there are obvious problems with that, right? So like you import two modules made by different people and they each have something named the same thing, and now you're out of luck because you can't import both of them. I mean, you would have to like write a renamer. That's sort of why the renamers were put in the first place is, okay, now I can remap one of them to resolve conflicts, right? Okay. So what we are moving toward right now is a thing where you can both do this, right? If you don't do this, if you just say import, then it behaves as it does today. You just get all the names. If you do this, then you don't get all the names dumped in your own namespace. You get them dumped in a namespace called myprint, right? The question is, where does myprint parent to in this case? And what I think is the right answer is it shouldn't parent to your application scope. It should parent to, it should essentially be its own fragment that doesn't share any namespaces with you. Actually, we have this thing called the preload space where all this stuff goes. So the reason why I like this is because you can't have weird Heisenbugs, or you get extra clarity about certain things, right? So if the print module shares your global namespace, then you could affect the overloads that it gets by declaring things in your own global namespace that happen to have the same names, right? And you could, in some cases, break the code without meaning to. This is a problem you don't have in C++ because, well, you have it, but it's a lot more rare because, like, you probably didn't include the header file of that other thing, right? Or they probably didn't include your header file or whatever, right? Whereas here, like, if everybody shares the global namespace, then you start having things like that. Like, oh, there's an overload up there and we see it, and it changes something, right? That's not the only reason, but it's one reason. It's probably also just faster to compile if you don't share the global namespace by a little bit. So if you have no namespace in common with print, and that's the cleanest thing, then how do you tell it how to print stuff? Well, one way would be to register procedure pointers at startup of your program. But that has runtime costs. So then your print module has like a hash table that it uses to get the overloads, or I don't even know, right? Or you could do it at compile time and let procedure overloading do the thing for you. In which case, well, that's appealing. It's on the one hand simple, and on another hand, doesn't have runtime cost. So then you need to be able to tell myprint how to print things. Well, how do you do that? Well, you could do a few different things, I guess. One that I was thinking is, okay, well, we do this. We're going to tell it how to print things explicitly at compile time, and then there's no runtime cost to this, except I just realized that that's not true anyway, because we pass things as an any, so you can't use compile time procedure overloading. You would have to use metaprogramming and have a runtime cost. You'd use metaprogramming to build a data structure of these and then have a runtime cost anyway. So maybe this doesn't actually help, but this is what I was thinking, right? There are other cases like this when I've just always thought, yeah, I just want to poke something in there, right? I want to be able to do surgery on a library, like without editing a library's source code. I want to say, you know, I like everything in this library, but I want to rewrite this one procedure. So I've got a copy of that procedure in my file, and I'm just going to rename theirs or delete theirs with something like poke, and then I'm going to put my substitute procedure in there, right? So I don't have to like do text edits on this library. I'm just dropping in substitutions. That's sort of the thing that object-oriented people were trying to do with inheritance, but it's a total cluster F, right? But if you can do it yourself, maybe that's a little better. Now you could already sort of do that. Well, you already definitely could do that with metaprogramming. But the thought is, with the compile time metaprogram, but the thought is that this might be closer to the code you care about. Maybe it isn't. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, man. Maybe I should wait on this until, maybe I should do this initial thing and then just try to figure out for print what is the best way to tell it how to print things. And just figure that out separately and not worry about namespacing features, and then see if namespacing features will help support that or not. So is the global scope the union of all the application scopes of all imported files, unless you put things into a namespace? Something like that. Like the imported files, it's not that it's the union of different scopes of the imported files. It's that those files all put things into the same one scope. But yes, basically the same thing. Are there ideas or theoretical constructs you had for this language but eventually dropped while coding the Sokoban game? Yes, tons of them. Tons of them. Is it possible to overfit your compiler to the demo game, and would that be a bad thing? It's certainly possible, but I try not to do it. The main thing preventing us from overfitting is just that it's a lot of work making one of these things. And that's why it's easy for me to get annoyed when people say, why don't you blah, blah, blah. And part of that is just, yeah, I'm annoyed that I have so much work to do, and someone's saying, why don't you just do a bunch more work sooner than you did it, right? Which again, may be me misinterpreting what people are saying in some cases, but like so many people just make comments like that. It's like, look, I'm working hard. There's only so much we can do in a certain amount of time. So, you know, when we're working on or looking at features that would be good for the demo game, that constraint comes very seriously into play. It's like, okay, this thing might help us a little bit on this one game, but you know, then drawing back on the rest of my game industry experience, how do I see that feature extrapolating to be useful to those other things or not? And if the answer is no, then probably we don't do it right now. I mean, so here's the thing though, like whatever we do for the first version of this language, wherever we end up, in no way is it going to be the absolute best thing, right? Because there's this paradox here that I've talked about a couple times before, where I'm designing this based on all my experience in C++, right? And what that leads me to believe is a good design. But I don't have any experience using most of these features because they're new. So to see really what would be the best form of them probably requires experience using the language. And we're trying to get some of that using the Sokoban game, but some of that just takes time. And so really what we're trying to do is lay a good foundation that we can then iterate off for future versions of the language. And so also from that standpoint, being aware of that makes it easier not to overfit, I think, because we don't have to do everything right now. We just have to do enough. That said, enough is a lot. Like there's a lot of features in here. But, you know, we're just trying to find that right line where we don't do too much. Yeah, totally. Like the phrase "why don't you" is often just asking something different. So, and that's the thing, is sometimes things in text messages to different audiences come out differently, and that's just part of internet communication. Oh joy. So the question for me is, what do we do? So it looks to me like the right thing to do would be this here. And the first, I was thinking, so I still have on my laptop a slightly different version of the compiler where things are importing into their own namespace, like I was mentioning. But that's actually a separate thing. Right? Because we could implement this, but say, if you don't say this, then it, or we could implement this part and just say it goes into the global namespace as now. It's like a child of the global namespace, right? So we could do that. So I think what we're leading toward is a namespace is a different thing than a struct internally. It's probably a very simple thing. It's probably just like a string name and then a scope. I mean, do we need to support these in local scopes, like in procedures and stuff? Probably. We could make a namespace the same thing as a struct. And just when it comes to storage, just say, oh, it's global storage? I don't know. That might be the easiest thing. I'm tempted to try that. A namespace isn't just a struct that's non-instantiable. And then you would get some things out of that. like, you could pass that struct as an argument to procedures, right? And all the type information and stuff that exists already could tell you about that namespace. I feel like this is the right thing. So this is the branch of the compiler where I have an import directive that's separate, right? I did that groundwork already. Yes. That's good. This used to be the same as a load, and I've changed it so that's a different thing. So well, why don't I just start doing this? The question is this syntax going to be a pain in the butt, or should I do something here to make it easier for now? Because, I mean, so we would parse a declaration. We would check to see if the thing on the right-hand side of a declaration is an import directive. If it is, then we just don't pull in the names. And actually, we can do a preliminary version of this where we pull in the names no matter what. But if we do this, we also get them in myprint, right? That's the easiest first step. So in this case, the value of an import directive would be a struct type that is non-instantiable, and that just contains the things in the export scope. Let's just do that, because that'll be good progress even on its own. Do I want namespaces to interact with overloading somehow? Well, I think overloading is always lexical, right? So you always go from where you are up. That's like the only thing that really makes sense. That means if we ever did something like poke, right, then you wouldn't get the overloading of the namespace that you're poking into, right? It would come from here. That might be confusing, but maybe we do something like poke copy where we actually copy the procedure into that namespace so that it gets its own different lexical resolution. I don't know. That we're not talking about doing poke right now anyway, so it doesn't really matter, but yeah. With the myprint import print, how would you prevent against multiple includes. Well, we already check for redundant imports, right? And we just return the same thing. So that's what would happen, is you'd just get the same value. What if there is a myToto import Toto inside print? Does it nest or flattens? It would nest, I hope. Still shooting for import print as my print. Do people think that's better? Like, we could do this. We could do this. The way some other languages do. I'm not convinced that either is better. I don't care that much about syntax. This one makes sense because it's consistent with all other notation. Like, okay, the value of this is a non-instantiable struct. We bind my print to it. There is a little bit of an abuse of notation going on, because if you just say import print, right, if we were strictly going by what's lexically here, then this would effectively do nothing. Like, it would import the module, but you'd have no way to access it, right? So kind of what we're saying is, well, it's a shorthand that if you import without this part, then you get all the names, right? So that's, it's not really an abuse of notation. It's like an extension of notation, or it's something that is not the minimal set of semantics, I would say. Could also say from whatever import whatever. Yes, we could say that, totally. Yeah, we don't want to rat hole too much on syntax. However, this one is a little bit related to semantics, a little bit, because you're saying, like, are you just binding a name to the value of something? Or are you like doing some process that needs its own syntax, in which case you're just choosing one arbitrary syntax or another? See, that's the thing, is sometimes syntax questions neighbor on semantics questions or are entangled with semantics questions. So it's not always so straightforward. Yeah. Don't know, having import in the middle feels wrong, strange. Well, it's because you're not used to the language. I mean, we have hash directives in the middle of things all the time in this language, by the way, if you haven't seen the streams. So import being in the middle of a line somewhere would just mean that import's in the middle of a line somewhere. Could you explain the usage of myprint? How would you access the functions within the print module? Or is print itself? Well, you would say, so if I bound it to myprint here, it's just, you could, let's just say print, just to remove the ambiguity, right? Because myprint was just a random name. Then you would say print.print, right? It would be like that. Just like you would expect. This is like most languages do it. I'm looking back for questions. Okay, I think I got all the questions. People are complaining about Vulkan in the Elite Lounge. That seems to be the constant topic in the Elite Lounge. Maybe don't care about private public, then it can just be a struct. Does it need to be anything more than something that manages aliases? Yeah, it's hard to think about. I'm figuring this stuff out as we go. All right. No, Vulkan is not a rule. You could talk about Vulkan in the Elite Lounge all you want. I am just observing that this has been a topic that has come up several times. Wow, so many we're up to 104 subscribers today. Let's make sure those people can all get into the Elite Platinum, Gold, Carbon, Copper Lounge. If you don't know that, so there's been some people who subscribed that didn't link to the Discord. So if you scroll to the bottom of the page, you can see how to use your sub to hobnob with the most elite discussion group in all of the universe. The Million Mile High Club, totally. What about using the name of the module as the implicit name if none is given? We could do that, but then the thing is, what if you just want to import it? I guess you would just say using, right? You would just say using import whatever. I don't know. I mean, it's not clear which is best. Like, I think you would end up saying this a lot, because a lot of the time you just want the routines, right? You don't necessarily want them to stay in a namespace. I don't know. Maybe that's my C++ heritage speaking, right? Maybe people actually want to keep stuff in namespaces all the time. I don't know. What about having the renamer become a namespace? I don't know what you mean. The renamer is a procedure, so that's a totally different situation. Almost everything having a namespace import name has a lot of value semantically. It's not a problem if you prevent nested namespaces so it doesn't go bananas. Dude, we have so many subscribers. I don't even know what to do. We have like 10% subscriber growth in 2 days. We could start a huge startup company based on that. Okay. Well, this is a real question. Like what happens when you just say import print? The lazy answer is you just get it. And that is good because it means I don't have to do as much work renaming all our frickin' imports and all our programs. On the other hand, Ignacio was definitely doing some things where he was explicitly wrapping things in namespaces because he didn't want that. So I think we do this one step at a time, right? So I do this. First, it just puts both names, and then eventually, maybe even today, it doesn't import the extra names. And we leave this the way it is today. And then we can change all of Ignacio's examples over. And then we can ponder the choice of, does this make a default name? Or not load, but like, does this make a default name, or, and you have to say using, or is it just what it is? Probably another stupid question, but what's the difference between a namespace and a scope here? Not very much. A namespace is just a scope that has global storage and that you can refer to with a name. A lot of scopes you can't refer to with a name, right? So if you have a procedure and you just open a scope with a curly brace in the middle of the procedure, that doesn't have a name. Using import was a solution for my language, but I wanted to refer to the name of the library by default rather than importing the names. I prefer writing fmt.println rather than println because I like to know where the name is from. Yeah, that could well be what a lot of people want to do. So that's kind of what I'm saying is I'm separating that out, I think, into a second question, because clearly the functionality has to exist, right? If the functionality doesn't even exist to put stuff into a namespace at all, then it's a moot question. So we'll get that working, and then we'll address the question of which way should this be. I mean, I could totally see having this put it into that name by default, and you have to say using, and then we just have a tedious day or several hours of changing all the current examples over, which would then be very biased toward using everywhere, but because we would want them to still work. But then they would be allowed to drift over time into whatever style people want. There's other stuff too. So we have a string library right now, and because string functions tend to be named things that are common, like length or whatever, we like prefixed everything in that library already. So it's like string length and whatever, and that's messy. So like once we have this ability, we can do a few cleanups. Like we can go take the prefixes off the string library, because if you don't want those, or if you do want those, you can just put them there. So yeah, I think we're good. I think I start doing this and we see how much we get done today in this direction. I keep having to go refresh the lounge because people keep subscribing. So many subscribers. It's crazy. I don't even know what to do. $66 million subscribers in the lounge. Why the sudden jump in subs? I don't know. Yeah, we'll make a room only for the tier 3 subs. And then we'll petition Twitch to make a tier 4 sub category that costs $1,000 a month. And then we'll make a special room only for tier 4 subs. Oh, someone asked what was my impression of China. I had a good time in China. The people who were hosting me were super nice. They like literally showed me around every day and put me up in a super good hotel and stuff. Yeah, it was good action. It's helpful in a language or in a country where you don't really speak the language and it's very far from anything that you speak. And it was interesting. I don't know that I would want to breathe the air in Beijing every day. But supposedly they're kind of working on that a little bit. So we'll see what happens. What did I think about Dubrovnik? That was fun. It's, however, a very touristy place. Did a lot of Chinese people speak English? Younger Chinese people who grew up in cities speak English pretty well. And that translates over to, you know, a lot of the audience of a game conference or whatever, you know, or a game trade show. So the show that we did, the G-Cores show, you know, I think probably most of the people who attended that speak English to some degree. But, you know, older people in China, like people my age even, probably don't speak much English. And especially if you go outside the cities to random places, then, yeah, no, it's not happening that way. How many languages do I speak? I speak English, I speak not very good Spanish, and I speak a very tiny amount of Japanese that is almost too little to comment on. Okay. Big groups of elderly people with boom boxes turning the music to max. I did not see that. You mean in China? I didn't see that. Does import directive work with a compile time expression? Example, import, run, get import. It doesn't right now, basically because I was just being a little lazy with it and wanted to keep things simple. We could make that happen and it wouldn't be very hard. We just don't do it right now. Okay, I'm going to warm up one more tea and then we're going to start making this happen. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to make the value of an import directive be a struct, in which case, why are they different things? I don't know, but they are going to be. Yeah, so when you say import, it's going to make a struct, it's going to set a struct not instantiable flag. And there you go. Am I going to write SIMD intrinsics? Maybe much later, not right now. The function calls might need the same directive. The function calls might need, I don't know what you mean. I don't know what you mean, man. Don't know what you mean. All right. Back in a second, and we will proceed on this feature. Not literally 1 second, more like, 2 minutes. Water is still boiling. How many of those books on the shelf do you think are about web development? I'm pretty sure the answer is exactly 0. I doubt that a web development book has snuck in, but it's possible. Load doesn't necessarily mean in the same directory, although it will default to that if you don't give it a different path. But really, it puts it into the same, it puts that file into the same module or namespace or whatever as you currently are in. So if you're in the main program, then a load loads a file into the main program, and if you're in some library, a load loads that file into the same library. All right, water is done. I've got the Winnie the Pooh cup from Thailand now. It's a good action. I've got a hot and cold drink combo. I've got snacks. I've got other snacks. We are just so set right now. Where are user-made libraries going to be installed? You're presuming that user-made libraries have an installation process. We're not going to have anything like that anytime soon. Okay, so we're done. Let's revert this, because whatever that was, we don't care. Can I name anything that the web does that is actually sane and possibly even good? I'm having a hard time with that question. I mean, there probably is something, right? Nobody gets everything 100% wrong. But I am not thinking of it right now. Yeah. Where are those libraries stored? How do you import them? You would probably... I mean, in the very short term, they would just be subfolders of your application, right? Later on, we would have a way to say, hey, here's an additional folder besides the compiler folder to get libraries from. And then you could have whatever third-party way you want of getting libraries and putting them in that folder, right? So that could be anything. Okay. If we're going to do this non-instantiable struct thing, we want to look at this thing that says like my storage segment. Here we go. So this is the routine where we decide where a declaration is stored, and we set that as a scope right now. Oh no. Even though I'm convinced the non-instantiable struct thing is the right thing, it's going to be a pain in the ass because I think we say, because the scope on the struct is going to be tagged as belongs to struct. And probably a lot of code makes assumptions about that right now. So we're going to have to deal with that. Okay, one thing at a time. Yeah, well, see, here we say, look, if it belongs to struct, get the storage out of this, right? For now, we're just going to say, well, let's figure out how we're going to mark this struct. I guess flags, right? Struct is not instantiable. This might not be the right way to do it, but Okay. If it belongs to struct, a non-instantiable struct, then that means it's in a global namespace. And so the storage is going to be ugh. Well, let's just do it here. Now this whole storage, setting storage and setting linear. Oops, that's the wrong thing. So these two things, storage is just the scope, and linear is like the structure that actually allocates bytes out in a linear array. And here what we're saying is like, look, if you're in a non-instantiable struct, then really you're just in global memory, right? Do I need both of these anymore? I want to look at that. Or is this a vestige of how things just have been? Because originally we didn't have this linear struct. We had storage only. Now that we have linear, do we really need storage? I don't know. Okay. So here, we use it, but this is redundant with this checking we're doing up here. So we could check linear, or we could set a variable. So we set my storage segment to that. And this is redundant with like if we set the thing in the lambda, then we know that. So we could set a variable for this. So really, the only reason we need storage is to set my storage segment. Who else uses that? Not very many people. Copy declaration copies it. This is the one place in the entire compiler that uses that. Really? The reason why is because we have an allocation, right? So this linear thing, we do like it's called a stack allocation, but that's not the best name, like, because it's on the stack or in global space, or it should just be called linear allocation, right? Maybe we'll rename that. So here, when we say if the declaration storage segment is the scope of the struct, we're sort of saying, is this allocation belonging, is this guy allocated inside this struct? Which, well, I feel like we ought to be able to tell from the linear allocation, but let's see. Okay, so first of all, let's just go to the declaration of this. So we have base address size, declaration index with an array. We have 4 bytes in here that we're not even really using. That's really not enough to do this job that we're trying to use it for. But there's other things. So instead of that check, okay, so instead of this check, I think we can check imported by using. Or I mean, I don't know. Let's just check that. I'm compiling the wrong build because assert won't go off in release build, but I'll compile a debug build as soon as this is done. PHP runs crappy code really well. I don't think PHP runs anything well, so I don't know what he's talking about. He has a different definition of well than I do. Does import work with relative paths? No, right now the argument to import that goes in quotes is not a path right now. It's just a module name. Okay. So can we even do our tiny program with this assert in there? Probably not. Oh, well, because we left a bunch of crud in the file, let's not do any of this. Or this. This whole file is a disaster. Undeclared identifier. Let's actually import print. Yeah, okay. So let's just see what case I'm missing here. And we're going to have all these old breakpoints. Okay. This declaration, its storage segment is null. It's not imported by using. It's not constant. What declaration is it? It's line 3581 of Windows. It's a member of a struct. Oh, but it's a polymorphic struct. Do we not have inside polymorphic struct? Desk inferred type defin flags. Dude, I hate Visual Studio so much. Oh my god. I'm just gonna do it. Desk, it's not inferred type, it's defined type, defin flags type definition is polymorphic. It's like Visual Studio, just do... All right. Well, we got far enough. Undeclared identifier vector 3. Let's get those things out of there. Hey, all right. Can we compile the Sokoban game without asserting? Okay. So that's all good. Now the problem is well, there isn't really a problem. Wait, so, well, we eliminated the need for this myStorage variable as a scope. We now just have the stack allocation. So we can swap these around. So we can say, if any of this is happening, then that, else, hopefully that doesn't break something. Let's make sure the Sokoban game runs with that change. And if that's the case, we can get rid of myStorage, which will simplify that code, which will be good. Because as I was saying yesterday or whenever, it's got to be a constant effort to simplify things. Otherwise, the compiler is just too complicated to think about. So unnecessary complications must be removed. Did it work? Seemingly. I've still got these. I was. I was debugging something at one point and I added these two print statements. All right. This is good. Okay, so now myStorage is only used in that same routine where we set it, I think. Update 3 September 2018. We are no longer using myStorage. This is presuming I'm going to change it from stack allocation to linear allocation in a minute. In fact, well, no, let's not do that yet. Let's finish what we were doing. So we're trying to get rid of myStorage, and it's all in here. I mean, this is an assertion. I'm going to get rid of that for now. Oh, geez. So there's something weird going on here. So I saw all these were in bytecode builder and I was like, oh, it's all in that same function, but it's totally not. There's a few other things. They're just all in the same file. So we're running the initializer. And yeah, if something is imported or anything like that, then we don't want that. I think we can put a similar assert in there to the one that we just did. One less because this wouldn't be a polymorphic function. But then there's this one. What is this about? We're emitting a struct dereference and constants are already handled. And import links are already handled. Right, so if we're down here, yeah. Okay, so let's get rid of this one. Well, let's get rid of this for now. And then 5362 says, well, um, 5361, not 3561. So we're again going to assert that it's either or well, that. So we're going to make sure that works, and then we're going to replace that check. Assert did not fire. So that becomes the if. That gets rid of that my storage segment. Here we're setting it. There we're setting it. Okay, so this set simply shouldn't matter. This one actually, let's undo these for a minute because those are not important. What we want to do is this one maybe. So for a top level declaration, the way we know right now if a declaration is at top level is this. We should be able to look at the allocation. Where was stack allocation again? So I think we can just put a flag on this. That just says because again, you know, this is 8 bytes, that's 8 bytes, that's 4. So we have an extra 4. Oh, this is bad though. This has to get bigger because I mean, I guess we assume, like, this being stack allocation is, you know, like I said, it's a misnomer. It's really, it's really used for global space as well, I believe. Let's verify that again. So, wait, how did this? I thought I deleted this. Weird. All right. Must have reverted it. Wait, what happened here? What happened to all my stuff that I did? Like the first thing we did was we put an if here. Frickin', you know, sometimes Visual Studio overwrites my files in ways that I didn't want. It happens once in a while. All right. Yeah, so we use the root data segment. Well, let's do this again, because our computer wants us to do it more than once. I hope that's what we called it. Okay, so that is the case. And then where the hell? It's in general. Okay. Using these for global data, so this limits the size of our global data to 2 gigabytes. Well, we will see if that becomes a problem. I doubt .obj files handle it either. Okay, so we're just going to do that. So I mean, or we could store that flag on there. I don't know. It's fine. We have to double check. We're doing something a little bit. Oh shoot, we already have an integer value. It's an alignment. Frickin' frackin'. Frickin' frackin', release the kraken. You know what? This isn't really the right place anyway. Because really, okay. So we're just going to copy these flags into every individual allocation. We could instead just have a back pointer on here. Yeah, dude, don't ASCII spam the chat or I have to ban you. That's not good. Not good. Okay. For now, we're just going to make this a flag that gets copied on. So we could put that into here. And then so all of these are like, hey, these don't belong to procedures or structs. Thank you, Emacs, for deleting half my file. I don't know how I put up with all of this anymore. Oh. This is linear. Okay. Let's make that easier to read. Okay, so why were we doing that? We were doing it so that when we allocate problem with the word allocate is it gets used a lot. Okay. SA allocation flags is linear allocation. I don't know how the completion in Visual Studio could be so bad, but it is. Okay, so that's great. Now, here, okay. So if the storage segment is application scope, and it's not polymorphic, really what we want here is assert decal stack allocation. If decal stack allocation flags and allocation is global. Okay, well, what's going to happen there? I changed a lot of things. Oh. Let's just see what that means when that happens. So did that used to happen? It's in the preload, line 291. It's a member of a struct. I don't know. Why we are here for a struct. Decal well, let's hope this works. Seems to be. Let's do release build and run the tests, because that'll be a pretty good cleanup. That'll be a good cleanup. Am I at peace with the fact that once this is public, you will need to devote more time to maintain it and update it? I don't know that that's true. What is my favorite graphics API in the world of new low-level ones like Vulkan and DX12? I don't know anything about DX12, but the answer is not Vulkan. So probably DX12. When was the latest public patch to braid? A long time ago. Yeah. Long time ago. I don't remember exactly when. I remember being really pissed off at the time that I had to do it. Okay. Well, we ran our tests. So now let's rename stack allocation to linear allocation. And let's not mess this up. Because we could be sad because we didn't check in. Okay. Hope I didn't break anything. Anything. Uh-oh. Okay, so it only did the lowercase ones. So now, we've got to do the same thing. Well, let's make sure this finishes. Okay, same thing for uppercase. Twenty-one occurrences. And then we just get rid of this member on declaration because now nobody should need my storage segment anymore. While that's compiling, we'll look up my storage segment. Like, nobody reads it anymore. So we should just be able to delete it. And all of this, even though it doesn't seem like it's on the road to implementing that namespace thing, really is because we're just making it simple. Okay, let's make sure that works. And then we can get rid of that variable storage probably. And just use the allocation, and then we'll be done with that. And we will check it in. Check it in, check it out, check it around, check it sideways. Okay. Great. All right, so we assign storage, and we assign storage whenever we assign linear. So we can do this. Look at how much our lines of code is going down. Look at how much our lines of code is going down. Let me just delete storage. Do it all in one step. Storage, goodbye. Goodbye, goodbye. Goodbye, goodbye. Oh! Forgot about this part. What are we doing here? We're setting the non-zero init data. Okay, so if linear and we weren't in a lambda. Okay, that's a couple of changes. We forgot to get rid of, that something could have broke there for all I know, honestly. Yep. Damn it. It was too much. Too much. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to back out these things that we just did. Okay. And we're going to check in. Yeah, we can delete these. We don't need these. We do need that local variable storage, though. So at this point, things were working. And then we'll check in, and then we'll replace those one at a time in order to perform this simplification. So that's working. That's working. So let's check this in. Oh, wait, error. Oh, it's that same problem. Partial file name problem. That just started happening, so I wonder what's going on there. Same thing. What is going on? Why is this so unreliable now? We'll have to debug that if we can make it happen consistently. Oh well, works fine, ship it. So this is simplifications of the my storage segment situation. All right, so now we just need to get rid of this kind of a thing. So here, we could just say this, even for the minimal change, because I don't think that's going to matter. Nope. All right, storage. Oh, we got to get rid of that. We didn't delete that before. There is going to be a build error on the server. Okay. Because we're compiling release build, we didn't check for debug build assertions due to my storage segment being missing. Let's see if there's any more. Certainly could be. Remove no longer valid assertion. Your argument is not valid, as Reddit readers would say. Okay. So I'm looking for who uses storage here. Okay. So there's that one. There's this one. Now this one I really think should be I feel like that is the right thing there. Let's see. Well, okay. So, and that's the last use of that variable. So it's really just this. This must be the one that I messed up last time. So this would be a data declarations. This would be imperative. This would be data declarations. This wouldn't matter. Okay, so first of all, we'll change this. This shouldn't matter. I might have just gotten a not wrong or something. All right, so if linear and linear, or no, not, oh, actually, we could just do this. Right? Like that, that's fine. That's fine. Hey. 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 So I must have just screwed that up before. So now, can we get rid of it? I think so. Man, what is happening here? We're going to need to debug that. All right, well, I think we completely successfully did this simplification. I think that is good. It might be break time. Does anyone have questions about what I just did? It was kind of a slog, honestly, to eliminate something. It wasn't even directly in line with what the forward progress we're making, but it was forward progress because we simplified the compiler. So basically what you saw there was a historical thing where we used this scope data structure to say where variables were, and that was how the compiler worked for the first part of its life. And then we said, hey, we're going to do this allocation structure, but there's still some logic in the compiler that uses the scope, and we don't want to think about that right now. So we had both for a while, and now we don't have both anymore. Now we switched. Can I explain what solution for namespaces I went for? You can watch the VOD. We haven't done it yet, so if you watch the next stream, you'll be able to see it happen. Do I ever use diffs to see what changes I made to spot bugs like these? A little bit, yeah. Not too often. Lines of code. I'm scared to know. Oh, count. 43714. So people haven't been adding too much while I wasn't looking. That's good. Does the compiler give information about a procedure's dependencies? Yes, you have all of that available. So this is 43,000. Sokoban reports 84,000. These aren't the same measure because this includes, this is something like if you added all these three numbers together for spaces and comments. So, you know, the compiler is 65 by that measure, so the game is still bigger. I'm not sure I trust this number, though. I'm not sure I trust it. I feel like there might be a bug where we're overcounting, but I'm not sure. No, this is a project that's existed since 2014. I am always trying to keep the lines of code down. I should have done a line of code count before those modifications. I'm pretty sure we reduced the number of lines of code by like, I don't know, 10 or 15 in that. How hard would it be to do count on the Sokoban code tree? Somebody gave me a thing that does that. So the problem is it's not really the right measure because this number includes libraries, which of course C++ projects don't include, but since we're writing all the libraries from scratch and stuff, it seems to make sense to do that. But we don't use all the libraries, right? So if you include the library folder in your file count search, you'll get stuff that we're not using, so you'll overcount. But we could definitely do a sanity check at some point. Like we could make a list of what all the files are that were opened and count those with an external utility and make sure it's the same. What I wonder if we're counting like print multiple times if we import it and deduplicate or something. You know, something like that could be happening. How big was the witness? I'm not sure. Like I did some speeches about it before release, like well before release, and it was 200 and something thousand lines. So maybe it's like 300,000 in the end. I don't know. Oh, yeah, our next witness sale came up on Steam. Awesome. Have we ever switched from one LLVM version to another? Yes. We went from a pre-6.0 to a 6.0. Was it an easy transition? I'm not sure. I didn't do it. The other guys did it, so I am not in a position to say if there was any pain there. Any plans on the Witness Battle Royale? Well, those would be secret because we haven't announced the game yet. Yeah. All right. I think it's break time. We're gonna do another stream later, where we now actually go forward again and start implementing the namespacing on the library. Now that so we did go a little bit in that direction. We made this flag. We're actually gonna okay. We're actually gonna have to check everyone who says belongs to struct, because it depends on why they want to know. Here we're copying, yeah. So a static if has to depend on us. So this one, for example, we're going to just put this in and not do it yet. Anyway, it's dangerous because belongs, look at all these, belongs to struct used to mean a very specific thing, and now we're going to make it make it a little bit different. Whoops. Anyway, we're going to start with that review when we start up the stream later. And once that seems reasonable, we probably will have missed some things, but it'll be at least kind of okay. And then before we even try to do the naming, we'll just make imports be non-instantiable structs. And we'll see what happens with that. All right, let's find someone to raid or something. Let's see. Omegathon final round. It's
now the heroes will go.
Oh no, that's not what's happening.
I believe
Thornwatch Live. I don't know what that is. It doesn't look like my thing. Could watch Boom play PUBG. Let's see, programming. Community. So like if I go here, nobody really uses this. Programming community, way more. Doing a tutorial of what?
That's
JavaScript. Yeah, you fail. Okay. Do people in the community inclusivity lounge have opinions about who we should raid? Doesn't matter if he's a great guy. He's programming in JavaScript. He doesn't get hosted or rated. Doesn't matter how nice you are. There's Devin, but we already did Devin at one point. We could do that though. Got to spread it around. Like 6 months ago. Come on, man. Maybe, okay, we'll maybe do Devin. Let's check game dev first.
Might be the person who's gifted the most subs on the channel. Jesus.
Because we always check game dev and programming and are sorely disappointed in both. Yeah, I don't see anything dramatic here. All right, well, Devin gets the host today because he strategically started up his stream. Thanks everybody for coming by. We will continue probably later today. Wait, let me see what people in the inclusivity lounge said. They said the JavaScript guy, no, they get banned from the inclusivity lounge.